Okay, hey everyone, welcome back to Lenin's explanation of the law on fines imposed on factory workers, written in autumn of 1895. So this is, in 1895, obviously before the Bolshevik Revolution, and what he does basically is these are, his distribution of his writing, and he was a legal professional, and so, or Lenin was, so he would write these to explain fines and send them to workers. And so we're reading these to see what we can learn about what law was in Russian Empire, during the Russian Empire, and two, another reason I say I'm reading these is just to draw, an understanding of what Lenin was doing during this time. It's just very good to know that, So, we're going to read part 2 of this. How were fines imposed formally, and what gave rise to the new legislation on fines? The fines laws were introduced recently, only 9 years ago. Before 1886, there were no such laws at all. Factory owners were able to impose fines for what they pleased and to any extent they wished. They did so on a monstrous scale and collected enormous sums for themselves out of it. Fines were sometimes imposed simply at the employer's discretion, without the reason for the fine being given. Fines occasionally amounted to as much as half the earnings of the worker, so that the latter gave up the employer 50 kopecks out of every ruble earned in the shape of fines. There were cases when extra fines over and above the ordinary ones were imposed. For example, 10 rubles for leaving the factory. Whenever the employer's affairs were in a bad way, he would have no scruple about reducing wages despite the existence of a contract. He would compel the foreman to be stricter in fining and in rejecting work done which had just the same effect as reducing the worker's wages. The workers long tolerated all this oppression, but as more and more big mills and factories, particularly weaving mills, were built, forcing out the small establishments and hand weavers, the workers' indignation at the tyranny and oppression mounted. Some 10 years ago, there was a hitch in the affairs of the merchants and factory owners, which is called a crisis. Goods were left on their hands. The factory owners suffered losses and began to increase fines with still greater energy. The workers, whose earnings were small enough as it was, could not bear the additional oppression, with the result that workers' revolts took place in the Moscow, Vladimir and Yaroslav gubernias. That was in 1885 through 86. Their patience exhausted, the workers stopped work and wreaked terrible vengeance on their oppressors, wrecking factory premises and machinery, sometimes setting fire to them, attacking managerial personnel, etc. One of the most remarkable of these strikes was at the well-known Nikolskoye mill belonging to Timofey Savich Morozov in the township of Nikolskoye near Orekhovo station on the Moscow-Nizhny Novgorod Railway. From 1882 onwards, Morozov started reducing wages, and by 1884, there had been 5 reductions. At the same time, fines were imposed with increasing severity, amounting in the whole mill to almost a quarter of the earnings, 24 kopecks in fines for every ruble earned. And in the case of some workers, to a half their earnings. To cover up these disgraceful fines, the mill office in the year preceding the outbreak did the following. Workers who had been fined to the extent of half their earnings were discharged, but were given their jobs back again, sometimes on the same day, together with new pay books. In this way, books that contained records of outrageous fines were destroyed. Where workers were absent without leave, deductions were made at the rate of 3 days' pay for each day's absence. For smoking, the fine amounted to 3, 4, or 5 rubles each time. Their patience exhausted, the workers struck work on January 7, 1885, and over several days wrecked the factory food store, foreman Shorin's home, and several other factory buildings. This terrific outbreak of some 10,000 workers, up to 11,000, were affected. Greatly frightened the government, and was immediately followed by the appearance in the scene in Orekhovo Soyevo of troops. The governor, a prosecutor from Vladimir, and one from Moscow, during negotiations with the strikers, the crowd presented the management with conditions drawn up by the workers themselves. In these, the workers demanded that fines imposed from Easter 1884 onwards be refunded, that thenceforward fines should not exceed 5% of earnings, i.e., should not amount to more than 5 kopecks per ruble earned, and that for 1 day absent without permission, the fine should not exceed 1 ruble. Further, the workers demanded a return to the wage rates of 1881 through 82. They demanded that the employer pay for idle days for which he was to blame, that 15 days clear notice be given before dismissal, and that goods produced be accepted by the management in the presence of witnesses from among the workers, etc. This huge strike made a very great impression on the government, which saw that when the workers act in unison, they constitute a dangerous force, particularly when the mass of the workers acting in concert advance their demands directly. The employers also sensed the workers' strength and became more careful. The newspaper Novoye Vremya, for example, published the following report from Orekovo Soyevo. The significance of last year's outbreak, i.e. the outbreak at Morozov's in January 1885, is that it immediately changed the old order in the factories, both in Orekovo Soyevo and its environs. That is to say, not only the owners of the Morozov mill had to change the abominable system when the workers jointly demanded its abolition, but even the neighboring mill owners agreed to concessions out of fear the outbreaks taking place at their factories too. The main thing stated that the newspaper is that a more human attitude to the workers has now been established, something that previously distinguished few of the factory managers. Even Moskovskie Vedomosti. This newspaper always supports the employers and blames the workers themselves for everything. Understood the impossibility of retaining the old system and had to admit that arbitrary fining is an evil that leads to disgraceful abuses. That factory stores are downright robbery. That therefore a law and regulations concerning fines must be introduced. The tremendous impression created by the strike was further heightened as a result of the trial of several workers for violent behavior during the strike for attacking a military patrol. Some of the workers were arrested during the strike and locked in a building, but they broke down the door and made off. 33 workers were brought to trial. This took place in Vladimir in May 1886. The jury found all the accused not guilty, since the testimony of the witnesses, including the owner of the mill, T.S. Morozov, manager Dianov, and many of the weavers, shed light on all the abominable oppression to which the workers had been subjected. This verdict of the court was a direct condemnation not only of Morozov and his managers, but of the old factory system as a whole. The alarm and fury of the supporters of the mill owners was thoroughly aroused. The very same Moskovskie Vedomosti, which after the outbreak had admitted the iniquity of the old system, now took a very different line. The Nikolskoye mill, it asserted, is one of the best mills. The workers' relation to the factory is not a feudal or a compulsory one at all. They come voluntarily and leave without hindrance. Fines are essential in the mills. Without them, the workers would get out of hand, and you might as well close the mill. All the blame, it asserted, lay with the workers themselves, who were profligate, drunken, and careless. The verdict of the court could only corrupt the masses of the people. But it is dangerous to joke with the masses of the people. Ejaculated Moskovskie Vedomosti. What must the workers think? Following the non-guilty verdict of the Vladimir court, the news of this decision spread like lightning through the whole of this manufacturing area. Our correspondent, who left Vladimir immediately after the announcement of the verdict, heard of it at all the stations. Thus the employers tried to scare the government by saying that if one concession were made to the workers, the next day they would demand another. But the workers' outbreaks were even more frightening, and so the government had to make concessions. In June 1886, a new fines law appeared which indicated in what cases the imposition of fines was permissible, specified the maximum fines, and laid it down that the fines must not go into the employer's pocket, but must go to cover the needs of the workers themselves. Many workers are not aware of this law, while those who are imagine that the relief gained in the matter of fines in this handiwork of the government, and that thanks for this relief should be accorded to the authorities. We have seen that this is wrong. Despite the iniquity of the old factory system, the authorities did absolutely nothing to bring relief to the workers until the latter began to revolt against it. Until the workers in their fury went so far as to start wrecking the factories and machinery, setting fire to goods and materials, and attacking managers and mill owners. Only then did the government get scared and make concessions. For the easing of their lot, the workers should thank not the authorities, but their comrades, who worked for and secured the abolition of this disgraceful treatment. The history of outbreaks of 1885 shows us what a colossal force is the workers' united protest. All that is required is to ensure that this force is used more consciously, that it is not wasted on wreaking vengeance on some particular factory owner, on wrecking some hated factory, that the whole force of this indignation and this hatred is directed against all factory owners combined, against the entire class of them, that it is expended on regular and persistent struggle against them. Let us now make a detailed examination of our fines legislation. To acquaint ourselves with it, we must examine the following questions. 1. In what cases or on what grounds does the law permit the imposition of fines? 2. What, according to the law, should be the size of the fines? 3. What procedure for imposing fines is laid down in the law? I.e., who, according to the law, may fix the fine? May an appeal be lodged against it? What arrangements must be made to acquaint the worker in advance with the list of fines? How must the fines be recorded? 4. On what must the fines be expended according to the law? Where is the money kept? How is it expended on the worker's needs and on what needs? Finally, the last question, does the fines law cover all workers? When we have examined all these questions, we shall know not only what a fine is, but also all the particular rules and detailed regulations of Russian legislation on fines. And the workers need to know this so that their reaction to each case of unjust fining may be an informed one, so that they may be able to explain to their comrades why there is injustice of one kind or another, whether because the factory management are violating the law or because the law itself contains such unjust regulations, and so that they may be able accordingly to choose a suitable form of struggle against oppression. All right, so next we're going to read 3. On what grounds may the factory owner impose fines? We're going to go ahead and start looking at Tsarist laws about fines during that time. We can examine the way that Lenin is using his legal knowledge and providing that to workers who otherwise didn't really have access to it. Oftentimes you'll notice what revolutionaries do is they provide things to the masses that is not given to them in their society. And through this, they can explain to them, hey, these are things that need to be given to the state. We're not profiting off this. We're doing this because people need this, and the workers need this, and the workers drive everything in this country. They're what create everything. Everything we have is because of labor. So, and that's why they do it. And they explain that. They explain why our society should give these things to workers, because workers give society everything. And that being namely through the state. A democratic state that is not bought out by, bourgeois, the same people exploiting the workers in the first place. That's where the state is now. That's why these people don't have access to legal advice or legal knowledge. Okay, so when we get back, we'll read section 3, on what grounds may the factory owner impose fines. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great day. Dodada goi.